Oh, I don't know why, but sometimes we just need escape. Now Jerry's got his boots on and he's dragging us out and far away. It's a fever.
Kia ora and welcome back to another episode of the Arscast New Zealand podcast, everything to do with Arsenal Football Club. I'm your host, Jerry Van... damn it, I did it again.
It's a fever.
Haha, lols. Thank you. Welcome to another episode of Tararua Fever. This is episode 2, and I'm your host, Jerry. I guess that first bit was a reflection of how we don't want to take ourselves too seriously on the podcast. We are all about tramping in the Tararua Ranges, deep, analytical, detailed chats about it, and not about Arsenal FC, my favourite and beloved football club in the Premier League. But that's another matter completely. So welcome to the podcast. And I guess one caveat that I wanted to make before we get into things is I'm still finding my voice as a podcaster. This is my first time doing any sort of podcast. Some may refute that. There was one small thing that I was involved with once before. But I really don't know what I'm doing completely, so please forgive any sort of sound quality issues or if it sounds like I'm in a fishbowl. I'm kind of just working it out as I go, and hopefully things will just get better as we continue. This show, as the title states, is No Easy Trips. And this is an episode that really is as simple as it sounds. I want to talk about how it's so hard to plan a nice, easy trip in the Tararua Ranges for a couple of days. This episode is sort of inspired by recent events of my partner and I wanting to go for a wee walk. It's been quite grueling lately with work for both of us. We work in both quite demanding jobs. And we're really keen to get into the bush and stretch the legs, but not do anything too outrageous. Which is counterintuitive to me because I often like to try hit the peaks, shall we say. But my partner, Lexi, she's fantastic, but she's just not feeling like a big one this time around. And so, in part, this episode is inspired by that. I want to tell a story about quite a few years ago, I think about 7 years ago, of a trip that I did with some friends, which was meant to be quite an easy one due to one of us in the party not having a huge amount of skill and experience and trying to find a nice easy trip, but really struggling. The second half of the podcast, we'll have a special guest from the Hutt Valley Tramping Club, a tramping club that's quite dear to my heart. If I didn't mention in the last podcast, my family have been a member of that tramping club for many, many years now. I might, for lack of a better term, say that my young brother and I are lifelong members. I think my mum and dad signed us up from quite an early age. And I guess the other part of it is that my mum and dad met through the Hutt Valley Tramping Club. So I probably owe them a lot. So I really look forward to catching up with our special guest today to have a bit of a chat around that side of things. So, when I first had my friend Kentos, his name's Kent. I hope he doesn't mind me calling him out. This is quite a few years ago. He said to me, I think it was his birthday coming up, and he said to me, can we figure out a nice easy trip for a range of skills and experience? It was, I used to live with Kent and our other really good friend Ben, who also has done lots of tramping with us in the Tararua Ranges, his partner Bridget, and Kent's partner Amy. Both Bridget and Amy had, I think, limited experience in the Tararuas, although I'd say that they're both very able. But, if you don't have that base fitness, sometimes it can be quite difficult. So, again, a birthday, looking for a nice, easy trip. So I had the bright idea, I say facetiously, that it would be
cool to do Cone Ridge, which was a bad idea in the end. Only in the context of the distance and some of the steepness. And for someone who hadn't really tramped in the Tararua Ranges before, it is quite difficult. And I completely underestimated that. So we went in on the Friday night. It was quite late when we got to the Wahine road end, just because when you leave from Wellington, I think it might have been almost a winter trip as well. So we got to the Wahine road end on the Friday night. I love that road end because it's, again, almost like Otaki Forks. You've got lots of variety where you can just sort of choose your own adventure. And it's always good to get to a road end on the night before, I think, because it allows for a real nice early leave the next morning. You can make a lot of ground. And, we had a really nice night. We lit a fire, chilled out. I think Kent and I both had our MSR tents, our hubbas that we were using for the first time on that trip, which was super exciting as well. We bought them separately, but we've been both eyeing them up for a long time. So that was really cool. And the next day we jetted off to Totoro Flats. And, by all means, that section of the trip is not too bad at all. I think that Totoro Flats Hutt is a great wee hut because it's so accessible for anyone to really get to within reason. There are some curly bits there. I really enjoy how you can sort of drop down onto the river when you reach that really big slip. I think you can go over the slip, but I haven't done that in a very long time. My preference is always to go alongside the river. So we did that, and we got to Totoro Flats. Probably took us about 5 hours because, as I said, we weren't rushing, and we had a bit of a diversity of skills and experience. Really had a really cool night in Totoro Flats Hutt. There was quite a few groups. I think it was a packed hut that night. And one group there was from the Tararua Tramping Club, and it was a bunch of the members there, older people who had brought along a bit of a youth group. I don't know how that sort of procured to get a whole lot of youth. They were all teenagers, and gosh, they were toe rags. I don't think they'd ever done any tramping, and I hazard to guess that this group of Tararua Tramping Club members had bitten off more than they could chew, in a sense. But talking to the old guys, they said, as long as they didn't leave the sort of vicinity of the hut and all that, they were quite happy for them to sort of get on with it. So I thought that was quite cool. At that point, I think I was really interested in looking at the Winchcombe Ridge, which, for anyone that doesn't quite know, goes from Cone, kind of the peak of Cone Ridge across to Mount Hector, and you go over Neil Peak and the rest of them. And if you ever are on the Southern Crossing or coming from Maungahuka looking over it, it's incredibly breathtaking. It's really steep either side. It's quite pinnacly. Never done it. I'm dying to do it. And I'll get my opportunity. I just always have to bide my time. So I was just trying to chew anyone's ear off that would listen to me about that, or who had any experience doing that. And talking to Kentos when we were looking at the map for the next day, my plan was to go up and over Cone Ridge and down to Cone Hutt, ideally getting to Tudaway. As I said, love Tudaway. This is actually before I met my partner, though. And Kentos is looking at me going, I don't know if this is such a good idea. His partner, who, as we said, didn't have a huge amount of experience, was probably not up for it. And I'm feeling like I won't say a dickhead, but I'm not feeling brilliant about my decisions for the itinerary for the trip at this point. So we decided that maybe the best course of action, if we were going to meet at Tudaway the next day, would be for him and his partner to peel off, come back the way we'd come along the Wahine River, and they would take the wee track that turns off and heads to Cone Hutt. If anyone's ever done, I can't even remember what that track is called. It's sort of the saddle track, goes across Cone Saddle and cuts out, having to go to over Cone Ridge. From experience doing that track, the first sort of hour of it's sort of straight up again. It's hard to compare Kapa Kapa Nui with it, but they're both super steep and really, really hard. And we had, I think we only had one PLB at that point. But I can't remember, because Bridget, Ben and I took Cone Ridge. We decided to do it. So we went up and over Cone Ridge and then met them at Turuai. In terms of the next morning, Bridget, Ben and I knew that we had quite a large day ahead of us. And so we decided to depart the hut at 6:30 and just leave. We had our bags packed. We just knew that there were so many people in that hut, and along with the teenagers, throwing no shade on them, but we just didn't want to get caught up in the havoc of a busy hut. So we just whacked our clothes on, grabbed our packs, and left quite early. I think it might have been about 7 o'clock by the time we left, but it was, and we decided to have breakfast sort of on the way up Cone Ridge, which again, another really steep one. With the expectation, as I've sort of said, that we'd be meeting Kent and Amy at Turuai Hut. And just an FYI, Kentos and Amy had never done that track that they were about to do, to up Cone Saddle and over. So we didn't really know what to expect. I don't think I'd done that at that point either. But here's Bridget, Ben and I at 7 o'clock in the morning on our merry way, getting over going up Cone Ridge. Again, I think for those who have been up Cone Ridge from that point there, you sort of go past the bridge that will take you sort of to the Holdsworth route. It's about 2 or 3 hours if you take that. I've just got the map in front of me. It's the Totara Creek track. Go past that and you sort of start getting into quite dense bush quite quickly. There's this little hairy or curly bit there where you can lose the track quite easy because it's not super well marked and the track's not super well formed, and it's just quite dense bush. So just take note of that if you ever sort of look and do Cone Ridge from that end. But once you're on that track again, it's quite easy. You're just sort of zigzagging up the really steep point, and I'm just looking at the map. It's about 957 meters where it starts pittering out. So really, when you're going up the nose of that spur, again on Cone Ridge, it is hard work. But because we hadn't had any breakfast, we knew that we wouldn't get too far, and we decided to stop and make a coffee. And, put the Primus on, get a billy on. Have a bit of muesli and a coffee and all that. And we knew that we had all day at that point, so we weren't too concerned. And I'm in very good company with those two. Bridget and Ben are lovely, lovely people. So, really, really good times. And again, I think I mentioned it before, this is a winter trip that, I think it was about this time of year. It might have been about May/June. So we're climbing up. I think we've gotten to sort of where it started pittering off, chilling out, and it definitely started snowing. Just slowly, just drips and drabs, nothing too crazy. But as we kept on going up, the wind started to get up as well. We couldn't necessarily feel the wind. There was small breezes coming through. But I could hear it. I could hear it ripping through both sides of the valley on the Neil Forks side of the ridge, and then also the Wahine side of the ridge. And I always start getting anxious. If anyone listened to the first episode, once we get onto the tops, and I mean, Cone Ridge isn't even that high. It's about 1,000 meters once you're on the top, but I always start feeling a little bit like what ifs. But I always have to suppress it and just put on a big smile with my friends. and generally I'm always fine as well. It's just sitting there in the back of your mind. As we're going up, I hadn't been to Neil Forks Hut at that point before either, so I'm sort of always taking notes on the way, not literally, just in my head about times and stuff. And I think we worked out that I could have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's about 3 hours to the turn off down to Neil Forks Hut, which I have done now. It's a really good trip. It's super gnarly on the way down. Again, I don't really have any other words to compare from across from Kapakampanui to all of them down Neil Forks. Down from Cone Ridge to Neil Forks Hut is mental. It's so hard. My dad's told me about a trip that he's done with the Hutt Valley Tramping Club, where it got too dark on their way down and they had to camp on the side of the spur, which I don't think would have been a very comfortable night at all. I've only been to Neil Forks once, and that was, again, probably, it was a winter trip. And by the time we got to Neil Forks Hut, it was just pitch black, and those forks, that water in those forks was raging. You could hardly hear yourself when you got to the hut. But anyway, I digress. I'll keep focused on Cone Ridge. Cone Ridge is a fun ridge. Once you get to the top, it sort of undulates quite a lot as they do. And by the time we got to sort of the peak of it, I'm just looking at the map. When you get to the big tarn up there, or the big lake, it's at 1,000 meters, 1,080 and 80. But it sort of opens out quite a bit, and by that point, it had been on and off snowing, but by that point it was a winter wonderland. It was white. We were about knee deep in snow, which was really fun. It's quite novel. At that point, where it had opened out, it wasn't too breezy. I was quite concerned that once we got into the top, it was really exposed, that we might be at a bit of risk. But it wasn't too bad. I could just, when you're in the trees sort of approaching, I could just hear the wind. But it was a little bit of a false positive. There was a breeze, but it wasn't too bad. That tarn had completely frozen over. You could hardly see it in the snow, but you could sort of make it out. So yeah, real novel, really beautiful. A few photos here and there, but at that point, none of us had good phones, and they'd all die because their batteries had gotten too cold and stuff. And again, taking notes, got to that Winchcombe turn off to go to Neil Saddle and up Neil Peak and then across Winchcombe Peak. And there's a sign there that says 6 to 9 hours, which gives my heart a flutter, of nerves, of the risk, of the just gnarliness of it all, but also the excitement to do that one day. Super cool. And by that point, we'd been walking 6-7 hours. 6-7 hours? Maybe 5 to 6. And we decided to have lunch, I think a late lunch. Sometimes when you just got your momentum, it's easier just to keep going. But we definitely needed to have lunch, and so we got over the exposed area and down the other side, and as we started descending off Cone Ridge, we decided to stop for lunch. It ended up being a relatively quick lunch. I think after 15 minutes we'd been sort of eating our sandwiches, and a complete blizzard just came through, and to the point where we couldn't even pack up fast enough. Poor Bridget, she was starting to really take a turn in terms of the blue lips, the shakes. She was freezing, so I whipped off. Well, actually, I didn't have too much gear on at that point. I had my jacket and all my thermals on. I don't think I was wearing long johns, but I've whipped out my over trousers and my mittens and stuff, and we've chucked them on her. And we've just had to get on our merry way. At that point, my tramping boots were really old. I'd had them since I was about 16. They were still in really good condition, but they were really starting to. It was at that point where I could feel the thinness of the soles quite well, and every step down that you took, you could feel that sort of impact on your feet. So I knew, it was at that point I knew that I needed new tramping boots. But yeah, it doesn't take too long to get down the other side of Cone Ridge, down to sort of Cone Hutt. I'd imagine going up it would be a bit harder. It's still quite steep. I've never gone up that way though, so in terms of difficulty and steepness compared to the other side, I'm not too sure. But just take it as it's probably going to be pretty hard. If you've never done it before, it's likely going to be quite difficult. And then we sort of got off Cone Saddle and down to Cone Hutt. And then from Cone Hutt down to Tutuai, it's only less than an hour. It's super fun and very beautiful once you hit that Taraniko River. Really, really beautiful, gorgeous part of the Tararua Ranges. And so we finally got to Tutuai Hutt, I think about 5 o'clock, maybe 5:30. And my friend Kent, he's hilarious. First thing he says when he saw us, he goes, "Oh my God, they're alive. Oh my God." I think he was quite anxious in the back of his mind as well, that, if we were going to take any longer, I think he was probably going to chuck his pack on and start walking towards us. So yeah, didn't mean to do that to you. Sorry, Ken. That's never my intention to make people nervous, but it's also never my intention for a party to split up. I think that's possibly the only time I've been on a tramp with my friends where we have split. And certainly not ideal. And again, that risk-averse, precautionary principle side of me did have it in my mind that we definitely needed to make haste on our trip just to get there and sort of not make my friends too nervous about where we were, and vice versa. If we had gone to Tutuai and they weren't there, I certainly wouldn't have really known what to do apart from probably wait, and then if they didn't turn up, start tracking back and going the way that they'd come. But yeah, luckily that was not the case, and it was a really, really good trip. But the lessons learned for me was to really, really look into the times and the difficulty. I often, before any trip, do a lot of Googling about previous experiences, and YouTube is a great source of knowledge. A lot of people put in a GoPro and go for a walk, and you can sort of see the terrain and what it looks like, and really good. I also worry about a lot of people that do that. I mean, I've seen people doing the SK in sand shoes or sneakers, and that I'm never going to recommend that. That's silly in my opinion. So yeah, no easy trips. If anyone ever does have any suggestions, I'm not on social media. Well, not in this capacity. I think for a lot of podcasts, you can send us an Instagram or send us a Twitter or a X or whatever it is, but I'm not interested in any of that. I do have a personal Facebook, which I'm also not really interested in. But if you ever want to get in touch to ask any questions that I would definitely like to talk about on the show, or any suggestions for things like easy trips, you can get me on tararua.fever@gmail.com. Would love to hear from anyone who has any interest in the show. Yeah, so I think that's all on No Easy Trips, folks. We'll take a break, and with me will be our special guest from the Hutt Valley Tramping Club. See you in a bit.
Oh, we've been walking miles, and now we'll take a break. And Jerry's got his boots up, so we'll sit a while. Don't you go away.
Kia ora, and welcome for my next guest, Murray President from the Hutt Valley Tramping Club. Nā mihi kia koe, Murray. Thanks for joining us on the show today. How are you going?
Fine, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you, Murray. It's probably been a long time since we've actually chatted properly, hasn't it?
Yes.
And Murray, I think in terms of tramping trips, I've done two main ones that I can think of with you. The first one was Mount Cupola in Nelson Lakes National Park
Yes.
back in 2013. That was probably my first proper trip, led by yourself. And then another one about 5 years ago, we did a day trip with the Hutt Valley Tramping Club into the Tararua Ranges. We went up Marchant Ridge and then dropped off it halfway up and went into the eastern Hutt River. That was quite a big day trip from memory.
Yes.
John Tristram led that, I think, maybe.
I don't remember, but it's a lovely chunk of river, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we follow down through the gorge, or did we take the bypass over the spur? Do you remember?
I think we took the bypass over the spur.
What a shame. Yeah.
Yeah. I do remember it was probably about a 12-hour day in the end for a Sunday walk.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a big one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining, Murray. And look, obviously this podcast is Tararua Fever. I'm hoping that everyone listening has got the fever. And so I was wondering, first of all, if we could just talk about your experience with the Tramping Club. Obviously, the Hutt Valley Tramping Club, my family has a long history there. It's where my parents met, and we've been sort of lifelong members. Albeit, I haven't always engaged that often with the Hutt Valleys, but they do hold a big place in my heart, and I love being a member of them just regardless. But I was wondering about your experience with the Hutt Valley Tramping Club. You're still a member. Have you been quite involved in the committee over the years and leading tramps and stuff like that?
All of those things, actually. What drew me into it, into the Hutt Valley Tramping Club, was I was involved with a scout group in Eastbourne here in Wellington, and the boys wanted a group of venturers wanted to go to do some bushcraft stuff, which I didn't feel confident to run by myself. So I talked to somebody, Chris West, actually, in the Hutt Valley Tramping Club, and I was invited along. They were running a bushcraft course. I took the boys along to a meeting. For some reason, they weren't hugely impressed with the idea of being as organised as the Hutt Valley Tramping Club was at the time. And I thought it sounded a really great place, actually. So the boys disappeared off, and I stayed actually with the Hutt Valley Tramping Club for the next 40 years or so, actually. Yeah.
Oh wow, you're a long-standing member.
Oh yeah, that was back in 1980 something, you know.
Incredible.
And very soon, I mean, I was incredibly fortunate. I was heading for a late 30s, I suppose, at that time. And there was a bunch of young people, you know, in their mid-20s to 30, and they were quite happy to take this old guy off on all sorts of adventures with them, actually. And then later on, of course, more youngsters came in. It was a bunch of school students, actually, came into the club. A whole bunch of them from, I think, Nainai College, actually.
Okay.
And they were very enthusiastic too, and quite rapidly, you know. There was always plenty of companions to go and do adventurous sorts of things.
Right. And
that was the revelation to me, was just the numbers of amongst these older club members. I don't remember your parents, actually, particularly, because I don't think I've tramped very much with them. But there was, you know, in the organisation, people knew lots of places that you could go to and explore.
Even outside the Tararua Ranges, I imagine.
Oh yeah, that as well, actually. Yeah, but the Tararua's a home country, aren't they?
The back doorstep, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. And tell me, does the Hutt Valley Tramping Club still put on those sort of bushcraft courses for younger people coming through, or even older people, as you sort of expressed that you got into it?
That's a tricky question, Jerry. It's changed its nature quite a lot. In the people who are belonging to it, just as we've all got older, but it hasn't refreshed itself in the same way of young people coming in. It's really quite difficult. I'm not quite sure what your experience has been, but if you come into an organisation where there's a group of people similar sort of age and interests, then it's very easy to become involved.
Yeah.
If you're just one or two people, it's quite difficult.
Right. Yeah.
To find your place amongst a bunch of in these days of older people.
Yeah, I can imagine that is probably true for a lot of things. Yeah.
It's quite noticeable, actually, walking. I know I was talking to Ross Gordon the other day, and some other people from
Yes.
those earlier days too. There are large numbers of young people because they're more mobile, more independent, and they're exploring the hills just as much as we ever did, but they're not doing it through the companionship of tramping clubs in the same way as we did.
Well, that was possibly a question that I had, is I wonder if tramping and the environment that we tramp in, and I'm not actually talking about the physical environment, just our accessibility and information for tramping has changed a lot over the years. And people are able to sort of do the old Google and go out by themselves and see for themselves.
Yep. I'm certain that's what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly probably how I engage mostly with tramping as well, is I get the map of the Tararua Ranges and I go for it,
Yes.
And I don't mean to discount any of the trips that the Hutt Valley's put on. I enjoy being on that mailing list to see what's going on at any given time. But sometimes I just have my own interests in the places that I want to go. So that's probably how I do it myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having said that, there was one trip, not last year, but the year before, that I signed up for, and they were going to go up Winchcombe from Cone Peak.
Yep.
And I got very excited about that prospect. Unfortunately, the trip didn't go ahead in the end because we had a massive storm come through. I'd imagine there would have been a lot of snow up there that weekend. But
that would have made it an even bigger adventure.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess that's where I do find things like the Tramping Club quite helpful, is that honestly, Murray, I look at something like Winchcombe and it terrifies me a little bit as well as excites me, and I think that'd be a safer environment for me to do that if I've never explored it before. So I do think that there is totally worth having my hooks into that as well, and having those options there.
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about what were the journeys that I'd like to talk about, at the moment, and it occurred to me that it wasn't actually the really exciting journeys were the ones where you didn't know the outcome.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you expected to arrive at the road end, on Sunday afternoon or whatever, but you quite deliberately chose, and you probably have found this too. It's much more of an adventure if you don't know an awful lot. I find the idea of following a guidebook quite constraining, because what you're doing is checking whether the guidebook is correct during the journey, rather than enjoying exploring.
It's almost like the spoiler alert for a movie or something like that, isn't it? The end of the plot. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I worked with Merv Rogers, who wrote the Tararua route guide.
Right.
He was a member of the Tararua Club, and much earlier the Hutt Valley Club, actually. And Merv was busily putting together. He'd walked over the whole of the Tararuas, in writing his guide.
Wow.
But he couldn't swim. and he actually let me write one section about traveling down the Wahine or something. I can't remember quite what it was. But he he was sort of adamant, that was the most useful contribution that he could make, actually writing down all of his experience. I found it rather constraining, actually.
Ah, okay, that's very interesting, and possibly speaks to your adventurous nature, I imagine, Murray.
Well, or not naivety, I think.
Well, I can understand that, but then again, once you've got those base skills of being able to maybe read the weather, read the terrain around you, and also know your own capability, then you're possibly not in too bad a position to sort of have that naivety of a track that you're going, or going off piste.
I think so, and that kind of speaks a little bit against my comment earlier about the delight in joining a group of people who knew so much about where we were going. And they led me quite happily into these escapades almost.
Yes, right.
And so far, anyway, safely.
Well, I mean, on that note, I know that you've got a couple of war stories in mind, but one thing that my father and this is where I guess I'm curious to know how maybe tramping with the club has evolved over time, is that some of the stories that my father tells me of, jumping in the back of a truck at 5 o'clock on a Friday in midwinter, and the truck has no windows. It's just one of those big boxes on the back of a truck, and you drive to the Holdsworth Road end, and you're climbing up to Powell Hutt at 9 o'clock at night or something like that. How is that still the case with the Hutt Valleys, or is that sort of stuff changed? It sounds crazy to me, but also very fun.
Yes, it's changed enormously because the age profile has changed.
Okay.
So there's not the willingness to, or the sort of physical, mental toughness, I think, at the end of a week's work, to dash off into the hills, the 3 or 4 hour journey on Friday night to get started on a journey just doesn't happen. They'll prefer to leave earlier on Saturday, for example.
Right.
That's simply age, Jerry.
I can imagine, because it sounds bloody good to me, Murray. Yeah. I always can't wait to get out there, and for me, if I can spend Friday night either camped at the Wahine Gorge Road end, the Walswadi Road end, or something like that, that means that I get an even earlier start in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
If
you go further back, of course, in the 20s and 30s when the organisation began, they worked on Saturday morning, and they still covered enormous distances, actually.
Wow.
And be back at work on Monday morning. And that's one of the things that I admire them enormously. Those people exploring the Tararuas without the topo maps that we were dependent on.
Yeah.
They still managed to cover enormously. So they were enormously strong, very fit.
I mean, I often look at all my gear, and I'm pretty up to date with a lot of it. It's all quite good gear that I've spent lots of money on and stuff like that. And I do often cast my mind back to the people who sort of pioneered the pathways for all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And they did a lot of, actually, that's an interesting observation at the moment. They did a lot of the track cutting and hut building early on, in the 30s, 40s, into the 50s, actually. And then that activity kind of died away. It was somebody else's responsibility, but it's coming back to be dependent on volunteers at the moment, actually. And it's interesting to see that happening.
I do see a lot on that, of volunteer track maintenance and hut maintenance and stuff like that. And I know that the Hutt Valley Tramping Club does have a large hand to play in that. I know that they've helped establish a number of huts in the Tararua Ranges. I know that the Waitawaiwai Hut or Powell Hut is two of a few. And I do see the call out for the working bees that go around, and also I think there's even in the latest Backcountry magazine for FMC, there's been an article on
Yeah, it was really great to see that recognition's being put out there, but also just that the clubs are sort of organising that sort of stuff.
Mm.
That's actually a point for me, is that I want to do an individual podcast on that sort of
I hope so.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to talk to some of the people involved.
Yep.
Yeah.
Derek Field, in the Tararuas, Derek Field is miles away, the leader of that activity. Derek
Right.
worked for Forest Service.
Yeah.
In the Tararuas. He was a colour early on. And interesting, he knows lots of the old routes, and he's been busily recutting them, actually, in the head of the Wahine Valley and whatnot. Doing a huge amount of work. Then he worked for Doc. He was the manager over in the Wairarapa, covering much of the Tararua Park. Now, of course, well retired. He's in his mid-70s.
Right.
But he's organising volunteers very successfully, actually.
Oh, okay.
They're
Wow.
reinvigorating that whole volunteer effort.
And did you say he's re-establishing old tracks, or is he even cutting new ones?
No, mostly old tracks.
Ah, okay. Yeah. I'll be very interested to check those out.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's the great thing about the Tararua Ranges, is there's no shortage of tracks or network. The network of huts and tracks is outstanding, I think. And I don't like to say this too much, but for those who don't know, I've moved to Christchurch, so I don't have the Tararua Ranges on my doorstep anymore. And when I look at some of the areas that I can tramp in the South Island here, whether it be Arthur's Pass or others, it doesn't seem like it has that same network of huts, that sort of what in my mind I might have as a safety mattress if I was ever on a tramp and I needed to bail out, and it's only 1 or 2 hours of a hut, I can just take a fork in the road and safely get there. It doesn't seem like it's necessarily the same down here, but I mean, look, this might be my naivety and I need to just go explore it.
Oh, I think so. Jerry, I grew up in Christchurch, and so much of our early tramping was in Arthur's Pass Park and over into the Hokitika headquarters and whatnot.
Right.
And huts were a bit further apart, I guess, but there's plenty of adventure, much the same as the Tararua, actually, country to explore there.
Yeah,
so
fantastic.
I don't know, just part of that independence, traveling with a tent or a fly or something, or a bivvy bag, is well worth having. Yeah.
I always carry my tent everywhere I go as well, and you don't have to, like you say, that independence is great. You don't have to rely on a hut if you've got something like that. Yeah.
My feeling is that in the Tararuas you can follow just about any spur anywhere, so you can just look at the map and pick routes. You don't have to stick to the dotted lines, of routes there. So spurs are fine, mostly to follow. But I recall very vividly, the middle of summer, it's an absolute joy to go exploring down the creeks, because it is steep country, and the rivers and creeks are pretty challenging, actually. So we set off, just 4 of us, to Chamberlain Creek, and I don't, it's a standard. Even then, it was a well-known route in the Tararuas, off between East and West Peak in the northern Tararuas, runs down to the Ruamahanga. And look, talking to people in the tramping club, I picked up very little information from anybody about what we'd find. But it was a beautiful weekend, and just as I left home, there was a 30 meters of 8mm rope sitting on the veranda. So I thought that might just be handy. So I chucked it in my pack, and off we went. Wow. Thank heavens we had that rope there, because within we went up through Hirapai, along to the saddle between East and West Peaks, and that's the beginning of Chamberlain Creek. And
I'm just looking it up on the map now.
Yeah. Well, within within 20 meters of 20 minutes of dropping into the head of Chamberlain Creek, we had to abseil out of a tree, you know, down the first waterfall that we came to, you know. And of course, all we had was this rope. We didn't have any harnesses or any of that sort of stuff, you know. So it was classic abseil, you know, around your thigh and shoulder and whatnot. Well, after 2 abseils around the right thigh, you know, you couldn't walk properly, you know, because you ripped all the skin off. You know? So the next 2 abseils were around the left thigh.
Good grief.
And it was just a wonderful summer's day where Tony and I were jumping off many of the little waterfalls, you know, into the pools. The other 2 guys weren't quite so keen about it. In fact, it turned out halfway down that one of the other blokes admitted that he couldn't swim and wasn't all that keen on water trips, actually.
Oh, wow. Not the best time to say that. He could have said it a little bit earlier.
It was a bit late. And we camped down. We got all the way through to down by the Ruamahanga and just camped there overnight, and came on out at the next day. But it was just the sheer delight of fighting your way down through some territory that you knew nothing about, actually.
Absolutely. I'm looking at the map now and I can't believe you. It looks like you must have started between West and East Peak?
Yes.
Incredible. Yeah, you're really high up there, and I can imagine there would have been some pretty gnarly bluffs to sort of traverse down.
That's right. Well, I mean, I've since taken a couple of club groups in there, you know, 10 or 12 people, which is a bit slower going, actually, and always been cautious, you know, because there's a really nice campsite about 2/3 the way down.
Right.
But I've heard of subsequently, you know, of groups being caught out when they've camped there and it's rained overnight and they've not been able to get down. So we've always gone all the way through. And but you know, that's the opposite end of our experience, which was heading into it not knowing, taking a group of club members down, also not knowing anything but entirely dependent on us, you know, to make sure that they got through successfully. No, just absolute delights and huge adventures, actually.
Incredible. I admire the bravery there, because I look at some of these sort of ridges and spurs when you're on other ones, and that's one of my favorite things to do, is link things up in the Tararua Ranges where you've been and what you can see and where you can go again.
Yes.
And John Fox has told me about a trip, which maybe you were on, I'm not sure, where I think it was on the Southern Crossing, they went up to Atkinson and maybe down False Spur, and they jumped off the edge there. And I remember being in Alpha trying to look over where they would have come down, and it just looks so steep and crazy that I couldn't even imagine.
Actually, can I tell?
You can, go for it.
We didn't go down False Spur. It was deliberately an effort to drop into we were going to follow the Taranaki all the way down from its very source up by Atkinson.
Oh, good grief!
And right out to where do you come out at Featherston, actually?
Yeah.
But the head of the valley is very scrubby. Man, it was hard work, actually, dropping in through the scrub. But interesting, you note, you'll see on the map, there's a big curl around underneath Alpha Hutt in the river.
Yep, I can see it now.
And there's a big sort of lazy S bend that comes out at by Cone. Yeah, well, in the top of that S, there are a couple of very large waterfalls.
Okay.
And I don't think we had a rope. I'm sure we darn nearly climbed up up to Alpha Hutt to get round one of the waterfalls, actually. And I remember coming down, you know, behind this big bunch of really enthusiastic young guys, you know, and suddenly the cry came up, "Go back up, there's another bastard."
Oh, God.
Well, we made it down to, I don't know, by the time we got to Cone on Sunday morning, we were totally whacked. Actually, we didn't do the rest of the journey out to Featherston. We walked out the standard route, but it was, again, it was just heading into this country that we hadn't found any information about, and just see what happens.
I see exactly what you mean by that, and it really is a see what happens trip. I can even see there's a few gorges in there and stuff.
Yeah. Strangely enough, I've never been down False Spur, which is a recognised route into the head of the Taraniko, actually.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine
sometimes accidentally, which is why it's called False Spur. But
yeah,
there's been a few rescues of people out of there.
I can imagine that too.
There's a really nice campsite at the foot of False Spur.
Okay. Well, I'm taking notes here, Murray, and adding these to my list of things to do. Let's see if I've actually got the nerve.
Of course you have.
But if I know that people have, done it before, then that's comforting.
Well, one of the interesting things about the centenary that we've just had in the Tramping Club was several of us hunted through the old hills and valleys and annuals and whatnot to find material, to make up a publication. And it was a fascinating exercise, actually, going back and reading these trip accounts, in hills and valleys, usually fairly brief, and to discover that people had been to all these places that I thought we were pioneers of.
Right.
But there's always been that adventurous spirit inside an organization where you've got a bunch of companions that you're confident traveling with.
It really is remarkable. And because I would even, like, if I had not have heard that story from you now and John Fox prior, I wouldn't have even thought about jumping in from Atkinson down into the headwaters of the Taraniko. Yeah.
Give it a go.
Yeah. And you just touched on it. Sorry to maybe divest for just a moment. The Hutt Valley Tramping Club did have their centenary anniversary. Was that at the beginning of last year? Was it towards the end?
23. Yeah.
Tell me, how did that go?
Oh well. I found it quite delightful, actually, to catch up with a lot of the younger guys that I'd tramped with a lot, actually, because remember this, 20-year-olds or late teens come into the club and they've got lots of energy and enthusiasm. They haven't got a lot of knowledge or experience, about the country they're in, so they were always fantastic companions. But of course, they develop careers, they marry, go away and have children, they disperse quite rapidly. And it was a real delight to see quite a number of those younger guys that I'd been tramping with, when I was in my 40s, I suppose, and they were in their early 20s and whatnot, to catch up with them. It was a great opportunity, to I suppose not to spend time listening to the people who are even older than me talking about the 1950s and the 1940s and whatnot, but to catch up with those young people that I'd spent time tramping and climbing with.
Oh, fantastic. And I imagine there's quite a few faces that have been through the club over 100 years, across a few different generations. Yeah, my mum and dad went to it as well and said that it was really great catching up with old faces as well. And tell me, was it at the Kaitoki park in just out of Upper Hutt?
Oh, Sunday afternoon was a gathering there. There were the usual things. Well, you're going back into some quite tricky sort of history there. My idea, because I was on I was the secretary of the club for a while there, just before the centenary thing, and I thought what we needed to do was actually to have an adventure program. to celebrate the anniversary, because that's what the organisation was set up to be.
Yeah.
Right back in 1923, but it developed actually into very much a social get together opportunity. You know, so there were meetings at the club rooms and a dinner on Saturday evening, all those pretty standard things. Actually, my idea, can I rave about this? It's well past.
Of course,
but
please
my
do.
idea is that because we were an organisation set up to foster tramping throughout the length and breadth of New Zealand, that we should go to North Cape and East Cape and West Cape and South Cape. They're all named. Wow. They're all named places. Wow, that got laughed out of court. North Cape's not hard, not too difficult to get to, up near Cape Rang.
Right.
East Cape's pretty straightforward too. Do you know where West Cape is?
I imagine somewhere on the west coast of either the North or the South Island.
Yes, well, it's in the south. It's out in south of Milford Sound, out on the Fiordland coast.
Okay.
Yeah. And I found this wonderful article about a couple who'd ventured there from Manipuri, I think they set off from.
Right.
And in 17 days, they had their parkas on for 16 of them.
Oh, wow.
They'd had to swim rivers and sounds, and at the end of it, they weren't talking to one another.
Right.
So Graham Lithgow, for example, thought that was an absolutely stupid idea to even think of going to West Cape. I think he's been down the coast, you know, one of those Fiordland explorers, you know.
Sure.
And South Cape is similarly right at the southern end of Stewart Island. You get there from Port Pegasus, I think, you know. But again, it's a very difficult country to travel. So it's not hard to think of adventures, Jerry.
It's not, and I don't hate those. I was going to say, I don't hate those ideas, Murray. I'd more than happily join you if I get the time off work.
You're welcome to do it.
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm sorry that they didn't take you up on that.
Well, yeah.
Well, look, thank you very much for your time, Murray. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast and sharing your experiences. You're a wealth of knowledge, not only for the Tararua Ranges and the areas to explore, but also the history of the Hutt Valley Tramping Club, which, as I said, I hold quite dearly, you know, close to my heart with my family's involvement and stuff like that. I'm always happy to be a member and keep paying my fees. So, yeah.
Great. Oh, well, thank you. There's no doubt, you know, you only have to put two trampers together and they'll spend hours nattering to one another. You see that in any social grouping, actually. So,
even just in a hut on a Saturday night in the bush, yeah.
It's a delight. Thank you for the opportunity to natter.
Thank you again to Murray Preslin from the Hutt Valley Tramping Club. Look, we better get this pod up. I know that the demand is growing and there's lots of people with the Tararua Fever out there. So before I go, I just want to do one special shout out to a very dear friend, one of my oldest friends, Finn, who is behind the intro and mid-break jingle, and possibly more to come. Finn's services of his musical ability and his production are, you know, available. And so if anyone would like to get in touch, please get hold of me at tararua.fever@gmail.com and I'll be happy to connect you. But as I said, demand is growing, people have the fever, so we've got to get this one up. We'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.
You have reached the voicemail of South Coast Tropical Bananas. Apologies for missing your call. coming to you directly from Whangarei all the way down to the south coast, Island Bay and Wellington. Conscious there are plenty of orders for our bananas throughout New Zealand at the moment, so I will endeavour to come back to you as soon as I can. It is a responsibility of mine to the local community to meet these agricultural requirements, and I look forward to hearing from you very, very shortly. Thank you.
Hey guys, Jerry here. Sorry, I know I said I'd be into work today, but might be a bit late. I'm just coming over Mount Hector now. I'll keep in touch.